Welcome back to the Extension Master Gardener training program. Our next section for the Turfgrass modules is Lesson 4, Fertility and Soil. In this section we will briefly talk about some of the soil and review and then dive into the fertility of turfgrass maintenance, when, why, how much, and then hit the top and then move on from there. So in review for soil, texture, structure, bulk density, and porosity are all important parts of the soil to increase soil health. With increased soil health, then your plant's able to survive and thrive, especially in turf. Texture is important when it comes to watering, as in sandy soils compared to more clay soils. Structure is very important, as well as bulk density. If you have a high bulk density, you may need to, or that means it's compacted, you may need to relieve compaction. Porosity is also connected to all of those as well. But one thing I do want to mention and make sure we know about is pH. When you do a soil test for your soil, you will get a pH range. For turfgrass, optimal, we're looking at a 6 to a 7. And in that optimal range of a 6 to a 7, as you can see here on this graph, is when most of the nutrients that a plant needs or turf needs is readily available. It's not bound to that soil particle and unavailable to that plant. We see sometimes that there may be an iron deficiency in turf where you see yellowing. So most commonly our first practice is go put iron on the soil when actually our pH may be too high, and that way iron, as you can see here, is now unavailable plant. If you did the soil test will tell you have plenty of iron in your soil, but your pH is too high, therefore you need to adjust your pH. To adjust your pH, you can use sulfur to lower it, and you can use lime to increase pH. These are things that are most commonly, sulfur is in a lot of different fertilizers, lime is not. So more commonly, this is not going to be a one application program. We're going to know that our pH is a little low. We're going to have to keep adding a little bit of lime every year to eventually raise that pH up into the optimal range. So that's one at the soil test. It's going to determine your pH and phosphorus, potassium, and know that pH, because if you have a high pH, then it may mean that that plant's not getting the nutrients it needs, even though the nutrients on your soil test report is saying that they're there and they're in the soil. So moving on to the fertilizers. Fertilizers, we're going to be concentrating on the 3 numbers on the bag: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So when you get a bag of fertilizer, regardless of what it is, these numbers represent a percentage. So you can have a 24-6-6, for example, with this, which means there's 24% nitrogen, 6% phosphorus, and 6% potash or potassium. That does not change regardless if it's a 5-pound bag or a 100-pound bag. That just means that percentage of that bag is that amount. So to move on from here, mostly we're going to be talking about pounds of nitrogen, not pounds of fertilizer, pounds of actual nitrogen, because you may be using different types of fertilizers in your program, but we want to make sure that we're only supplying the amount of nitrogen needed. So for example, this bag right here is 24% nitrogen, okay? We're not going to say it's 20 pounds, we're going to say it's 100 pounds. I'm going to do even numbers here, okay? So how many pounds of actual nitrogen do you think that there would be in that bag? 24, exactly. If it was a 50-pound bag, how many pounds of nitrogen would be in that bag? 12, exactly. So from now on, we're going to be talking about pounds of nitrogen applied, not pounds of fertilizer type of thing. So, basics information on fertilizer. Most of the time, our applications are based off of nitrogen. It's the one that's most frequently needed and used in the turf system. Our soils in Kansas typically have enough phosphorus and potassium in them. So always make sure you get a soil test, and if you don't need to apply something, then we don't have to apply it, or make sure we get a fertilizer that has very low numbers of those nutrients, because the higher the number, the more expensive the fertilizer typically is going to be. So our first number is nitrogen. It is the most important nutrient that we need to add. It's the one that causes the green color and the growth. It is your basic nutrients that the turf needs to grow. Now we're going to split this up into two different kinds of nitrogen. We're not going to get, there's a bunch of different kinds out there, but we're going to split it up into two different kinds. And they're going to be very simple. We're going to call one a quick release and one a slow release. So a quick release nitrogen means it's readily available to that plant and used up really fast. So it's only going to last maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's not going to last all season long. Then we have these slow release products, which means it's released over a longer period of time. How that is done is by different mechanisms. Some have to do with the microbial soil population of breaking things down. Some have to do with coated ureas, which is a quick release source of nitrogen, and they just put different thicknesses of coatings on it that take different times to break down. So for example, you may have a coated urea that has 25% of it has no coating on it at all, 25% of it has a thin coating, 25% has a medium, 25% has a thick coat. So then you would apply your nitrogen, and then what has no coat on it whatsoever is immediately available and took into the plant. By the time that is used up, because it's very short-lived, the one with that thin coating on it has degraded enough, and now it's released and available to the plant. Now by the time that one's used up, that medium coat has degraded type of thing, and so on and so forth. So that's how we get, that's just one example of how we get an extended release of nitrogen. And it's important to know, because if you go out and you put a quick release on, it's not going to last you all season long. You may need to split your applications up into multiple applications instead of doing one initial application for the rest of the year type of thing. So nitrogen, we're going to call those the two different sources. Phosphorus, make sure you get a soil test. If you don't need it, if there's enough in the soil, don't add it type of thing. If you need phosphorus, most of the time it's when you're seeding or sodding. Phosphorus is immobile in the soil, or not immobile, but doesn't move in the soil. So when you take your soil test, you're going to get a phosphorus amount of the average across that 6 inches of your soil test. And because it doesn't move and roots need it to grow and develop, you may add phosphorus when you're starting new seed or when you're sodding, because those small teeny tiny roots are not going to be able to get to all that phosphorus in that 6 inches. So you would apply a little bit when you sod or seed that helps them grow, and then once they're in that soil, they're able to take the phosphorus up that's already there. It improves establishment and rooting. Sometimes it's called a starter fertilizer. So it doesn't move in the soil. So that's why we have to maybe add some when we're sodding or seeding, because those tiny baby roots can't get to it that's in that soil because it's right there on that soil surface. Now potassium, same thing. If you don't need it, don't add it. It's related to stress management, as in heat, traffic, cold tolerances. Now this doesn't mean you have to go out and I'm going to put a bunch of phosphorus on it to get through the 110-degree summer or the -20-degree winter. This means if you don't have adequate potassium in your soil, then you're not going to get the heat tolerance and the traffic tolerance and the cold tolerance that you could get if you had adequate levels in that plant. So just make note of that, that if you need it, just get up to that level, and that's about it. Now there's some other nutrients that have sometimes been deficient in plants. Most of it, adequate calcium, magnesium, and micros. Sometimes it shows up that there may not be enough calcium, there may not be enough magnesium, or sometimes maybe you bought a house and someone had been over applying these things and now you have too much calcium or whatnot. Sometimes iron is needed. We talked about that with the pH. Make sure your pH is right first. In the short term, you can apply some iron as your pH is adjusting to get rid of that yellowing or that mottling type or effect. We see this more in the fall time. It's not like a year-round, but especially on bluegrass. It will speckle driveways and sidewalks. Iron is rust. right? So if you get this on the driveway and if you don't sweep it or blow it back into your yard, you'll have speckled iron looking spots on your driveway and sidewalk. And that's a good common practice with anything, clipping management, fertility. Concrete doesn't grow fast because we fertilized it or watered it type of thing. So if we make sure we water and only fertilize our turf, it's what's going to grow as well. So here's an example again of a fertilizer label. It's going to tell you all different types, your percentages, how much, for example, this one right here is going to be 3.8% slowly available urea nitrogen. So only 4% of this is slow available. So this one is going to be predominantly quick release type of thing. So if you got 14% of that bag is nitrogen, 4% is a slow release, we have 10% quick release. So it's majority of it's going to be available to that plant quickly, and then a little bit of it is going to be available a little lower. So, and also most of the time on these bags, they will tell you this is a 90-day release product or 180-day. So it takes the guessing out of it type of thing. And that's what we want, is make sure we take the guessing out. And so we know how long it's typically going to last in the environment and be available to the plant. So when do you fertilize? I break this up into cool season and warm season. All right. Cool season grasses predominantly in the fall. This is when the soil is warm, the air temperatures are getting a little cooler, it's wanting to grow, it's when we need to seed, it's when we need to fertilize. So we're looking at September to November is your prime application. September, October, November. And you can do this however you want. This is how customizing your own lawn program and making it yours with what products, what time, what resources you have available. So for example, September, you can use 1 to 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. You can use a slow release or a quick release, okay? Say you used 1 pound of a quick release, it's going to be gone in 4 weeks. You're going to have to come back again, maybe October and November, to put another quick release application out, because our goal here is 3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, September through November, okay? So you can, I call it spoon feeding. You can spoon feed a quick release, or maybe you even go out in September and you know you have a 180-day slow release product. You can put all 3 pounds out in September and it's going to release September, October, and November, and it's all used up. We do not want to put a slow release down in November. Be careful of those. There's some winterizers out there. We do not want to be putting a slow release in November, because that grass is going to slow down and we're not going to be mowing it. It's not going to be growing. So if that nitrogen is not taken up by the plant, that's when we see leaching. That's when we see movement of the nitrogen into other places. So don't fertilize the plant if it's not growing type of thing. So if you do an application in November, make sure you use a quick release source so it uses it right then and there. Now this November application is really, really important. So what happens, that plant takes it up and it's growing and it knows it's going to get cold, so it holds on to that stuff, all those sugars and everything that they've made throughout the wintertime when it's going through hibernation. And then when it greens up in the spring, it's already ready to go. It's not waiting for you to feed it to start growing. It knows when the soil temperature's right, when the air's right, it's ready to get growing then. If you apply a good fall application, you don't really need a spring application of fertilizer. During the spring, if you did an application, you typically see shoot growth. And we all think we're champion turf managers. Because the soil is cold, it's not growing much roots. So it's going to put it all in the shoots. So what's going to happen, it's rapidly growing, not putting a lot of root growth on. Get in the summertime, we don't have deep roots. Here comes the heat, the drought, and it's not able to withstand. You may have to put a little bit on in May. 1 pound at max, and a slow release is what I would recommend, because you don't want that flush of growth, top growth, because of the soil conditions are a little cooler. So take home message, 3 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, September to November. It's typically what's needed. You may need to put a little bit on in May, depending on the year. And note that. Say, well, I put one on in November. I know it ran out, but it was so warm up until Christmas time. And you're like, maybe it did use all that's there. It didn't have any stored in it. So this next year I may do a May application, you know. Just kind of think about the environment, think of what that plant's doing to best then benefit that plant with your nitrogen applications. Now here's so this is fall fertilized applied on Halloween. So we're in October on the right side. This is not applied. This is what the picture looks like in December, okay? Held on to that green color, looks really good through the wintertime compared to the same turf that was not fertilized. Now you keep going in February, this is the same yard. This on the right side had that October fertilization, October, 30th or 31st on Halloween. It held on to that green color. As soon as it warms up, May time frame, it's ready to go. Or March, April time, it's ready to go. It's not relying on you. And you have a higher quality looking lawn throughout the wintertime. Now this is not dark green, but it's darker green than that, type of thing. So that's cool season grasses. Now warm season grasses are totally opposite, okay? Warm season grasses, we're going to split up by species, by how hungry are they. So for example, Bermuda grass is the hungriest, and all these grasses are growing in the summertime. So it's going to need 2 to 3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. But our growing year that we want to feed is June, July, and August. So it may be a pound of quick release in June, a pound in July, a pound in August. Or maybe 3 pounds of a slow release in June. Or a pound and a half of a mid-slow release in June and mid-late July, a pound and a half. Zoysia grass, just a little bit less, 1 to 2 pounds per 1,000, June, July. And buffalo grass, I say about a pound, okay? Buffalo grass, I really like the idea of a slow release fertilizer, because if we put 1 pound of a quick release fertilizer on buffalo grass in June, it's gone by the end of June, and we still have July and August growing season. So if you put 1 pound of a slow release, then like I said, a little bit goes a long way. And say it's a 3-month product, releases for 3 months, you get 1/3 of a pound in June, 1/3 of a pound in July, and 1/3 of a pound in August. And that's all it needs through the summer to keep that green growth. We did a study at K-State looking at different amounts of nitrogen on buffalo grass and traffic tolerance. And on the untreated plots that we had 0, 1, 2, and 3 pounds of nitrogen applied to it. There was no statistical difference between 1, 2, or 3 pounds of nitrogen. There was no added benefit, color, or quality of adding 2 to 3 pounds of more nitrogen on buffalo grass. So 1 was good enough type of thing. I wish we would have tested smaller portions, 1/2 pound, 1/4 pound type of thing. But a little bit goes a long way. Now to conclude with the fertility, make sure that every time you are applying fertilizer, I like to fill up on the concrete. If it spills, it's easy to clean it up on the concrete instead of in the grass. I like to put a tarp down because if it spills, it's easy to pick the tarp up and you don't even have to sweep at that point. Always make sure the gate or the opening on the fertilizer is closed when you start filling it. We laugh about that, but I would say 50% of the time it's always open when I fill it up. And then you get looking over and you said, I just filled this thing up and it's all on the ground. So make sure it's closed. Another recommendation is try to go in 2 directions when you're applying fertilizers. Say if you were going to apply a pound of nitrogen, you want to make sure you apply 1/2 pound going north and south and 1/2 pound going east and west. This prevents any mishaps, any skips. Say you got a little too far on one way or got a little too close together. It'll blend it all together type of thing. Now if you use a drop spreader, make sure you go wheel to wheel. Broadcast spreaders, disperse it to 10, 15, 20 feet wide. Drop spreaders, drop it right underneath that spreader. Works really great in between sidewalks and the street because it's really hard to do a broadcast spreader there. And this is a good example of where you place that fertilizer is where it stays. Right here you can see someone used a drop spreader and did not overlap, did not go wheel to wheel, so you can definitely see that that fertilizer only stayed where it was dropped at. So make sure you do good fertility practices, go two directions at half rates. A drop spreader works better like at the front of this picture, down here on the bottom, in between maybe that concrete and that road, instead of using a broadcast spreader. All right, if you want more information on managing fertility, we have a lot of extension publications, a lot of Kansas Healthy Yards videos, even in our handbook, chapter 7, a lot of information that goes in a lot more depth about managing and fertility management of your turfgrass. Now with that, we will continue on the next lesson with watering practices for the next time. Thank you.